the screen there if I get out of the way?
Yeah, what are we looking at?
Willie
I'm
Mays.
getting
It's the catch.
the catch. Vic Wirtz,
Yeah.
54 series.
I have it right in the room here. I like that.
Autographed by Willie?
No.
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 But you're tight with Willie. You probably
Willie
should get
is,
that
I
autographed.
love Willie, and I haven't seen him in 2 years. It's I
You
wait.
guys were doing a lot of stuff through Tommy Bahama and some other things, weren't you?
He made me his personal interviewer.
I would too.
I loved
You're a
it.
freaking pro, and
Biggest
I'm
honor.
Willie. I want the best.
It was the biggest honor I think I've ever had. When Willie, because very quick story. Did I ever tell you how Willie and I first kind of got together on this thing?
No, tell me.
So I'm sitting in the clubhouse. Willie Murph was there as well. Mike Murphy, the clubhouse guy.
Gotcha.
And Willie's sitting there every spring training. He would sit at a table, and people would come up to him, and I would sit with him. And I'm old enough where I know his career to some degree.
Sure, you watched it.
Yeah, and he loved talking about it. So he tested me one day. He said, "All right, give me the 1956 Cincinnati Reds." And I went, "Okay." Ted Kluszewski, Johnny Temple, Roy McMillan, Wally Post, Gus Bell, Frank Robinson, Ed Bailey catching. He says, "Yeah, but who played third?" I said, "Ray Jablonski." And all of a sudden I could see, there's that recognition that I see when I can see in the other guy's face that he knows that I know.
Right.
He knows I know it too. And Willie and I, from that day forward, we had a good relationship. And then when he got the Tommy Bahama gigs, he would sign a ball and take a picture with you. And then for an hour afterwards, in front of the whole audience, I would interview him. And of course, Willie, he's such a showman. And he's the best showman ever. And that's the way he was a baseball player. And he knew I was a former lawyer. And he would say, "Can't you ask a better question than that? You're a lawyer." In front of everybody. I'd say, "All right. And how about the catch? You've been milking it for 60 years. You had it all the way, didn't you?"
Right. So you told Monty Irvin, right?
Yeah. We would get into it all the time. And I love him. He's so special. He'll be 91, please, on May the 6th. I think he'll be 91 years old. But I had
kid.
Such a good time with him. I really tell you, he's
a
very special person. He's a very special person. And I hope that we can see more of him this year. I hope so.
It's funny. So many conversations with my father. My late father, I recall, and he always had a lot of words. As you could imagine. You see me, I'm constantly talking.
Oh, he's a lawyer, right?
He was a lawyer, worked in the San Francisco City Attorney's Office.
But
man, when Willie and the topic of Willie would come up, my dad would he was suddenly like a 3 or 4 word guy. The best, simply the best. And that's what he would say. And he always would, emphasize it, the best. And Marty, to me, that hour that they show on NBC Sports Bay Area, Legends it's called, and the hour of Willie Mays, every time it's on, I watch it start to finish.
I know.
And my favorite moment in that hour is our good buddy Ray Ratto, who works on 95.7 The Game. With Damon Bruce and Ray Ratto. I thought, Ray's such a wordsmith and such a great, guy painting pictures with words. And I thought his point on Willie was the best, which is probably why it's at the end of the hour. He said, Willie was the signature player of baseball's most talented era. Mm-hmm. And I think that is just so well put, and so well encapsulates kind of the enormity of Willie Mays. But the signature player in baseball's most talented era, he could do everything that everybody else could do, just a little bit better.
Well, he was the complete. He could do it all. There are some guys who hit with more power. Maybe some guys threw a little bit better, had better base stealing statistics, but he had it all. He had it all. He was, and look, I've done 10,000 interviews and asked so many people who was the best. And I'm 98% say Willie Mays.
Yeah.
Really. And that's a true story.
Unbelievable.
Tommy Davis just passed. And the last time I saw him was sitting at the table with Willie. And that's how I got to meet Tommy Davis. And, Willie just was so generous with his time. he knew, look, like you, I had my own sponsors, you know that, for my
Sure.
show. This has all been my whole thing for 26 years. I get the time, I sell the time. I'm like you, I'm the producer, director, I'm the guy that's on and everything. And Willie understood that. And if we had someone from Georgie Brothers would come down, and I'd take him on the field, and Murph would say, bring him in. And Willie would get him a ball. He would sign a ball for him.
He got
And
it. He
he
understood.
understood
Yeah.
what I was going through and what I had to do. And he played ball and he
Yeah.
did it. And, we go on and on about him, but I said to him, I said, look, Willie, I was in Florida in the 60s. I didn't come to California until 1972. I said, I really didn't see much of you playing, maybe a World Series or an All-Star game. I said, were you any good? Could you play it? So that's the relationship we have. And it really is.
Willie, according to Jim Davenport, they knew at a young age, a very young age, maybe 14, 15, that he was on a different level. And he played with the Black Barons in Birmingham, and he was a kid. He was a
in
kid.
high school.
They were adults.
We went on road trips with the Barons, and the teacher would say, all right, what city did you go to? And he'd have to give a report on that city. And you think about it. See, he came up in 1951. And of course, he was signed in 50 by Eddie Montague's father.
Right.
But he had 4 or 5 years of serious minor league, major league, Negro League baseball behind him. So when he got to the big leagues, this wasn't a kid who was 20 years old and he said, gee, where's the locker room? And when he saw Warren Spahn pitch, he'd seen guys like this. He'd seen Satchel Paige.
But it was a different time as well, Marty, because he didn't have an entourage and he didn't have a handler. And when they called him up, and John Miller makes the point in the Legends piece that, Willie had to find his own way to the Polo Grounds and how you got there. And, you're talking about a kid, a young guy who's lived his life in Alabama. And now he's in New York City and he's got to kind of find his way. And he did it.
Yeah. That's why he played stickball on the street and why he bought the kids ice cream cones, because he felt comfortable doing that. When he got the call up to the big leagues, he was watching a movie. This is what he tells me. I guess it's true. He was watching a movie in South Dakota, and Leo DeRocher calls and looking for him, and the theater says, Willie Mays, please come to the office, right?
Right. Probably thought he was in trouble.
And Leo's on the other end. This is 1951. The Giants are struggling. And Leo says, you're coming up. We're bringing you up. And he says, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. And Leo says, what are you hitting? And Willie says, 477. He says, you're ready.
You're ready.
You're ready. And then he went 0 for 12 and hit the home run off Spahn, then went another 0 for 12 after that.
Supposedly he cried in his locker to DeRocher that he wasn't ready and that he wasn't. And DeRocher reassured him and said, hey, as long as I'm here, you're playing center field.
Yeah. Herman Franks.
These are great stories.
Leo was in his office and Herman Franks says, hey, your kid is crying out there.
Right.
And Leo, who was, just such a perfect manager, really, he could handle everybody. And he was a veteran, that. The All-American out is what they used to call him when he played shortstop for the Cardinals. He couldn't really hit, but he was a guy on the field. And he went out to Willie and said, just what you said, Larry. He says, I don't care what you hit. I don't care if you never get a hit. You're my center fielder. And the rest is history.
I love Eddie Montague, and his father, as you said, was the scout that signed Willie. Yeah. And I used to talk to Eddie about this all the time, but what was going through his dad's mind the first time he laid eyes on Willie Mays?
He went
and thought, imagine you're a scout, you're looking for that, and you're spending your whole life looking for that, and then there it appears. I would have loved to known what Eddie Montague's father thought when he first laid eyes on Willie Mays, and he thought, look at the talent, look at the athleticism. Truly, it's too bad he's not with us, because I would have loved to have interviewed him and talked to him about what he saw and what he thought at that point in history.
He went down to the Birmingham Black Barons to see Piper Davis, who was the manager, first baseman. That's who he was sent to see. And of course, then he saw Willie. and he wired Horace Stoneham, and Horace was his own general manager. Horace was hands-on in all the time that he owned the Giants. Horace ran the ball club. He did. And there's a whole story with him. I love the story. Stephen Trader, Treder, did that book last year. It was fabulous. So Eddie Montague Sr. calls Horace and said, listen, forget about Piper Davis. I found this other kid, and I want to sign him for $15,000, something like that. And that's what he did. He signed them the day he graduated high school. When he got his,
he missed his prom.
He had
to skip the prom.
He skipped the prom and the car and the whole thing, and the girl with the corsage, and he tells the whole story. And he, split the money with his aunts and with his dad. And then I think, he had a few $1,000s left over for him, which in those days was a lot of money.
Oh, sure.
And then he was off to Trenton, New Jersey, to play in that league. And then he'd go to Hagerstown in Maryland, and it was horrible.
The racist taunts.
Oh, horrible.
Yeah, awful.
And, he tells a story that, his teammates understood it. And what would happen, he'd have to stay in a separate hotel. And what they did was they would come to that hotel and climb in the window and stay with Willie, so Willie wouldn't be alone that night. And they'd leave as the sun came up. That's what his teammates did for him in Trenton.
It's always amazing, too, to me that Willie, despite the fact that he had experienced the racial taunts and all that, through many of those years, never carried that with him as far as bitterness. Never did.
No.
If he did, he buried it so deep that none of us saw it.
Yeah.
Because he played the game with joy, kind of like a baseball version of Magic Johnson. When
he came to San Francisco, he couldn't get a house. Once they found out he was African-American, all of a sudden, sorry, the house is not available. So it took a lot of doing to get him his house in Forest Hills or wherever it was in San Francisco that he lived. And but you're right. He didn't take that trauma onto the field, and he didn't take it onto his personality.
No.
He felt he was a baseball player, and that's what he was going to do. And in later life, with his foundation and all the things he did for young people, which is still a core part of him, that's where it came out. But, Willie was suspect of writers. He was suspect of a lot of people. He was no picnic to deal with.
Sure.
And Bobby Bonds was no picnic to deal with. And, of course, who came after that?
Sure.
Barry. And that's what Barry got to see, was his father and Willie. So, Barry was no picnic to deal with either. But, yeah, Willie never took it, and Roy Campanella wasn't very vocal. Jackie was vocal. Joe Black was vocal. But Willie just said, I'm a baseball player and I'm here to play ball. And that was what he did.
Great, a man of dignity, too, tremendous dignity. Yeah. I thought that was the point Lasorda made, I think, in talking about him. He's like, incredible person, but man, the dignity.
Well, I said, he was up 14,000 times, and he got hit 100 times and 14,000 at bats. And I said, how did you not get hit? He said, I got out of the way. When I saw that ball coming in,
Drysdale would headhunt him every game.
Come on, they knocked him down every game. Every game.
Willie Barbie would have been the home run king, right, Marty?
And there's a warrant for your arrest.
Right, exactly.
I mean, really,
yeah.
He got knocked down every single day. Knocked down. And you look it up, in 12, 14 years, 154 game season and 162, the guy missed 12 games in 12 years. And that's the kind of player he was. He was fabulous.
If he didn't lose 2 years, almost two years plus, I think, to the military,
52 and 53, and he came back in 54.
And he had an incredible year
in the military, and he played baseball in the military. And
but those are prime years, Marty. He could have been the home run king. It could have been him and not Aaron who broke Ruth's record. Really,
he was 660, and he probably could have had another 60 home runs easily in those times, because he was that kind of player. Look, he came back. He hadn't played for 2 years. Came back in 54 and led the league in hitting.
Right.
Wow. and the Giants swept the World Series with with Willie leading the way. And I've told you a story about the batting title, didn't I? Yeah, with Don Mueller and Duke Snyder?
No.
Oh, yeah, it's the last day of the season, and they're all bunched up to see who's going to win the batting title. And Leo says, "You're going to win it." Says, "All right." So he goes out, and, Willie goes 2 for 4, Snyder goes 0 for 4, and Don Mueller goes 0 for 4. Willie never took to Don Mueller because he couldn't really play defense, and he was sort of a slap hitter. And he would say to Don Mueller, "Look, you stay on the right field line. Monty, you stay on the left field line. Let me take everything else." And that's the way he would deal with, with the outfielders. So he goes out and he wins the batting title, by a couple of points. And Leo comes up to him after the game, and in an envelope, he hands him $1,500. And Willie says, "What's this?" Leo says, "I bet $3,000 you'd win the batting title." And he gave him the money. And that you couldn't say that in those days, but
Sure.
That's a true story. And then that night, where does Willie go? To the Ed Sullivan Show, which was, when you did something big in New York, and Sunday night at 8:00, Ed Sullivan, was the huge show. Willie was on Ed Sullivan that night. What a time for Larry, he's 23 years old at that point. How about that?
It was such a different time that, there's footage now. If a left fielder, gets taken out on a double switch, if he gets back to the dugout and he forgot to hand the little cheat sheet card to the replacement left fielder, he probably would run back out there and hand it to him. There's video footage of Willie positioning outfielders and infielders with his glove. He's like, you move up, you go back, you go.
Alvin Dark will tell you that Willie was the guy who said what pitch to throw and where people were going to play.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, he ran that team.
He was the analytics department.
Yeah, he ran that team with Jim Ray Hart. He was good to Jim Ray Hart, and who had the drinking issue. And Willie would say, "All right, here's the bottle. You can have this once a week. That's it." And Jim Ray Hart had some fabulous seasons, but Willie took care of people. He really did. He took care of people, and I love him. And the moments that I've had with him in Palm Springs, I tell you, when he cried in Palm Springs, did I ever tell you that?
No.
Oh, we're doing a show at Barbara Sinatra's foundation.
Okay.
Al Rosen was there, and a lot of
former Giant general manager, great third baseman with the Cleveland Indians back in the day.
Yeah, 1,000 people. And we're doing our thing, after the lunch, I'm interviewing him again. And I asked him, I just said, "Willie, how would you like to be remembered?" And all of a sudden he started to cry. He's crying. And he says, "I just want to be remembered by the fans that I gave them a good performance every time they saw me. And I did it all for the fans." And the tears are coming, now I'm standing there. What am I going to do? So, I gave him a paper towel or a tissue and all that. But in front of all those people, he just broke down and said, "I love